What's going on, family? Back with my guy, CEO of DDM Group, Neil Nelson. I like to call this Views from the C-Suite because you got that wonderful view behind you there, Neil. And
Awesome.
I think today, I want to get your insights on this whole DEI fallout, man. And speaking of that, coming off of Super Bowl, I saw where Kid Rock was speaking, and he called, DEI during the Super Bowl an IED because of how Kendrick Lamar had all black people and all that. But as it relates to business and whatnot, what are your thoughts on where we are with that? We're calling for a fast, or well, not we, but there are many in the black community calling for this fast or boycott, so to speak, of big box brands like Target. What does that mean in 2025?
I don't know what it means in any era, specifically around the issue of protest, right? And what protests can do for us this late in the game. I think that a lot of the people who are calling for boycotts and calling for fast, I saw that one of the bishop at New Birth uh, Baptist church here in Atlanta or in the Atlanta metro area was calling for a fast from some retail stores. I think he mentioned in particular Target. And I think that obviously he means well, and in the NAACP, I think they're also calling for something similar. I think they all mean well. I think what's missing from this is really a good study of history, understanding the history of these kinds of movements in the black community and their success rate. I think people look at the civil rights movement and they saw the immense success that came out of that movement, and they say, well, if and when we have problems, let's just do that and hope that will work. And what we've seen is that over the last 30 or so years, maybe 40 years, we have not seen substantial levels of success with that strategy of protest or boycott when it comes to corporations or even government officials and policies that are made at the federal, state, uh, or state level.
Yeah, I obviously you mentioned the civil rights era. Now, what do you think as far as historical lessons could we learn from things like the Montgomery bus boycott, or successful movements that we can apply to this modern economic resistance, so to speak, to show our force?
Yeah, I think the Montgomery bus boycott. We have to remember that that bus boycott was happened in a small city in the South with a limited number of people, and you cannot necessarily take those principles and apply them to large scale national efforts without also having in place large scale national organizational capabilities. And so when you call for a bus boycott in Montgomery, what was in place at the time was actually a lot of structure, organizational structure, capabilities that the community had in Montgomery to allow them to be effective. For example, they had alternative ride share structures. They also had mechanisms of tracking the buses. And so they created alternative incentives for people to not take the bus. In these cases, we're just asking folks to not shop at certain retail places without any kind of incentives or recourse if they do. And so what's going to happen is that most people are going to ignore you because they are going to do what they have the habit of doing before, and you don't have any mechanism of tracking that they are shopping there, and also to reward them for not shopping there in the case that they don't shop at those retailers that we're talking about.
It's funny you say that. I know we oftentimes have discussed um, how we have to organize ourselves in terms of the Black community. And oftentimes we find other communities organizing us and then profiting off of us when we don't do that. So, what structures, organizationally speaking, do we need to make these types of boycotts effective from your vantage point?
I think we have to understand the the theory and principles behind organization of large groups of people. The Black community in America is in a very interesting situation where it is a large enough population, but it doesn't have central government institutions to organize it, right? And so, in a way, it's a latent group. There's a really good book on this topic called Logic of uh, The Logic of Collective Action by Mancur Olson. And in that book, he talks about what he calls a latent group, which is a large group of people who do not have the organizational mechanisms to bring their people, their members, to act in a way that benefits the common interest. And he said that there are actually three main reasons why. He said there are three separate factors that keep large groups from furthering their own interest. One, the larger the number of members in the group, the greater the cost of organizing the group for collective action. Second, the larger the group, the smaller the fraction of the total benefit that any person receive when the group interest is achieved. And the third reason, and the third factor is that because of the first two, most individuals are disincentivized from bearing any of the cost for organizing the group and taking action in the first place. And so as a result of this, the large group remains what he calls latent. And so what we have in Black America as a whole is a latent group. And so before we start prescribing strategies and actions to be taken to achieve our collective interests or our common goals, we have to understand that by and large, Black America is a latent group. And that designation is important before we can even talk about anything else and take any action.
Yeah. So, if I'm following you correctly, Neil, basically we need to internally do some work for ourselves in order to be effective. Because it's not about whether or not these protests or boycotts work, but we're understanding why they don't work, so to speak. And
Exactly.
what I feel like I'm getting is, well, let me ask you this, because in other groups, say whether the Asian community, the Jewish community, they seem to be very well organized. Should we have systems in our internal structure internally as Black people that reward our allies, who those who are, as they say on code, or punish, what I'm saying, um, betrayal internally. You know what I mean? Is that effective? Do you think that that's practical or realistic? And is that something that would work as we branch out and we start to deal with the external world?
That's a good question. I think that we have to understand. So back again, this latent group. The latent group is a group that fails to organize and act in a way collectively. I mean, the members they fail to align their actions to achieve their common interests. That's what makes them, by default, by definition rather, a latent group. Groups that are mobilized, large groups that are mobilized, they're mobilized because of um, really two reasons. One is that there there are coercive mechanisms that a central elite develops to organize them. And so when we talk about a nation, for example, or nation state, the state is that elite that creates the kind of mechanisms to force people through coercion to do things. It's why the state has to have a monopoly on violence, because it forces you to do things that you may otherwise elect not to do, like pay your taxes, like obey the law, and so on and so forth. All of these things are actually collective actions. When you pay your taxes individually, we all pay our taxes collectively. We we allow our we allow the state to organize those resources and to deploy them for our collective benefit in ideal circumstances. In some cases, they waste those resources. But when you don't have that central organization, those central institutions of the state, then you have what's called a latent group. Now, there are three broad forms of control that any group can have. One of them is coercive, we just talked about that. The other one is actually narratively based, which is that you have to educate the people to know that they are a particular, that they are belong to a particular group, and that the group has an interest, and that they have to act in ways to benefit the group interests, to identify with the group interests first and foremost, and then to act in ways that realize the group interest, and to not identify with other group interests, and to not act in ways that realize other group interests. The Black community in America has done only a basic, leadership in particular, has done only a surface level effort in educating Black people into understanding that they have a unique set of interests. What they have not done is educate them into identifying what the alternative interests are and what kind of actions need to be habitual for them to realize the collective interest. And this is the problem that Black America has, is that because it doesn't have the coercive ability, none of us can make any of us do what we don't want to do, right? That's a significant handicap that we have. But then we also don't have the education to train us, to enculturate us to do things for cultural, habitual reasons to make us aligned. And then the third class of power that you have to get a people to do something for their interest is the reward, the positive reward, the incentives, right? And so, because when the civil rights movements and other movements occurred of similar with similar strategies of boycotts and protests, what you had is that still a handful of Black folks went out and protest, boycotted, sat at certain in places and for example at dining parlors in America and were brutalized, but they were able to get the civil rights bills passed, and then everyone benefited. So a small group of people acted in a way that the entire group benefited from. And therefore, the masses of the people kind of didn't engage, didn't participate, and they still don't participate. They don't engage. And so to get them to engage in mass at the biggest level, you have to have, the last resort that we have as Black people is to have positive incentives, exclusive incentives though, meaning that you don't get it unless you participate. That's the only, we have two recourses in Black America: educating and training each member of the group to do certain things that accomplish our goals, and creating exclusive incentives that you only get when you do these things. But that requires a lot of organization, a lot of planning. You can't just do it in the fourth inning, at the end of the fourth inning. You can't do it as a reaction to events. It requires the vision and the forethought of saying, what has been our experience in America and in the world? What kind of challenges do we face as Black people in this environment, this society? And what kind of challenges have been reoccurring and are likely, therefore, to occur in the future? How can we build the organizational capacities? What kind of things we need to have in place so that when things like these anti-DEI initiatives occur, we already have the infrastructure, the game plan. We've rehearsed them. We've trained our people from the babies to the elders. Everyone is trained and prepared to act in unison to bring about the outcomes that we desire. And so to call for a boycott at this level, this late in the game, without having done that kind of work, is likely to result in failure meaning that the goals and the outcomes that are being sought will not be realized.
Mm. Um, well, we know it kicks off, I believe, March 5th, okay, until about
Mm-hmm.
April 17th. One of the
Mm-hmm.
things that I thought was interesting and I thought was a positive was the fact that um, they're calling and organizing some of the black businesses that are out there. So I
Mm-hmm.
got some insights in terms of them saying, hey, if you want to buy toilet paper, you can buy it from these black businesses and things of that nature. What do you think about this seemingly economic segregation, so to speak, that we seem to be headed towards?
Yeah, that's a that's a very powerful term, economic segregation. I think that any economy has two sides to it: a demand side and a supply side. Um, Initially, the the terrorism of white supremacy in America prevented black people from both sides, or sought to prevent black people from both sides of the economic system, both the demand side and the supply side. What we had in the civil rights movement was an opening of the demand side, which meant then that black people can go out and consume anything that white folks produced. Because prior to that, black people were by and large restricted to consume things that black folks produced and or things that were produced by other non-black people but were being distributed through institutions or through outlets in their community. And so now, the civil rights movement, post civil rights movement, we have integration on the demand side, which means the consumer side. We can buy anything anywhere. But on the supply side, there was never full integration because there were always mechanisms in place that prevented Black America from participating fully in uh, from the financing side, the capital side, from access to markets, access to distribution platforms, and so to a great degree, this whole Target thing and what Target and others was had committed to do was to provide more supply side opportunities for Black America and others that through their DEI efforts. So we're talking particularly about Black America here. And so this segregation had always been the case. It's not something new. We're not moving towards it. It's just no more, it's more pronounced or it's more noteworthy because of this conversation. But I still think that the challenge that we have is not one of calling for a boycott, because boycotts can work, right? Boycotts have they can have the effect, because ultimately what these guys are trying to do, the NAACP and the bishop, what they're trying to do, and others like them are trying to do, is to say, let's leverage the buying power of Black America to uh, use it as a lever to nudge the other actors, corporate America, government, policymakers, towards doing things that benefit Black America. And what I'm saying is that those strategies are not likely to work until we organize the Black community itself internally more effectively. And that means creating the kind of structure that help us track our behavior, um, help us to identify people who in the Black community who are not in alignment with what is in Black America's interests. And then there may have to be some negative incentives for you as an individual not being in alignment with what's good for Black America, and also to track the folks who are in alignment, the folks who are doing the things that benefit Black America economically, and to reward those people. And this is what in the literature is called selective incentives. We need to have selective incentives to even have an effective boycott at this level of the national community. Now, if we're talking about just in Atlanta and we wanted to just track people who went to go to a particular church and to wear, a particular color on a particular day, that's easy. We know who the members are, and on a particular day, we'll watch and see who's wearing, for example, white and who's not wearing white. And it's an all white event. When you're talking about 40 plus million people, you need to have a database. You need to track them that to a database and to be able to identify people accurately, and somehow to track them and to have them volunteer to be a part of the database, which means to have incentives to be in the database, incentives that they can't get anywhere else. That's what makes it selective and exclusive. This is how we build. This is the kind of things that needs to be done to build up the organizational infrastructure so that we can say to the members, okay, anyone that shops at, so say for example, Target in the next 90 days or 100 days or the next year, we're going to know because you have signed up for us to track your consumption this way, as a way for us to be more effective. Now, I mean, this is an extreme case, but I'm just giving you the kind of things that would need to be done. Of course, there are other ideas that we can explore, but until we start thinking about rewards and punishment and training, we're not talking seriously about having the kind of power that can organize the buying power, the voting power of Black America to realize our collective interests.
How do we sum all of this up?
I would sum it up this way, Jose. I would say that first we have to recognize that the Black community in America, 40 plus million people, that we are what literature calls a latent group.
Okay.
And because we're a latent group, we are ineffective in realizing our common interest, even when we agree what the common interest is. And therefore, in order to realize, to move from being a latent group to being a mobilized group, we have to create selective incentives to incentivize individual members of the group in mass to do certain things and to not do certain things. And those incentives can be positive and they can be negative. Positive is rewards, and negative or coercive and punishment. And then finally, to not to be able to optimally mobilize our people, we have to train our people to identify themselves with the group and with the group's interest, and to know what actions benefit the group interest, and to build habits around acting in ways that benefit the group's interests.
Oh man. All right. Neil, always a pleasure, brother. Thank you for these jewels, these gems, and I'm looking forward to next time, bro.
As always.